Have you ever stayed in a relationship that you knew was hurting you? Have you ever tried to leave, really tried, and found that you couldn't? Or maybe you did leave, and then went back, and then left again, and went back again. And each time you felt more confused, more ashamed, more convinced that there must be something fundamentally wrong with you, because a person with any self-respect would have walked away a long time ago. If that sounds familiar, I want you to hear something clearly before we go any further. There is nothing wrong with you. What you are experiencing has a name. It is called trauma bonding, and it is one of the most powerful, most misunderstood, and most important things we can talk about when it comes to relationships, and why we stay in ones that are breaking us. I'm David, and welcome back to your guide to relationship psychology. If you are new here, welcome. I am so glad you found this. And if you have been here before, it genuinely means the world that you keep coming back. This channel exists because these conversations matter, because too many people are suffering quietly, in private, not understanding why they feel the way they feel, or why they can't seem to do what everyone around them is telling them to do, which is just leave, as if it were that simple. As if love, even painful love, even love that is hurting you, was something you could simply decide to stop feeling. Before we go any further, if today's conversation speaks to something you've been through, or something you're going through right now, please like and share this video. Send it to someone who needs it. Because trauma bonding is incredibly common, deeply misunderstood, and people are carrying so much shame around it entirely unnecessarily. Let's get this information to the people who need it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, so you never miss a conversation like this one. Okay, let's talk about trauma bonding. Let me start with what it actually is, because the term gets used a lot and not always accurately. Trauma bonding is not simply loving someone who is bad for you. It is not just being in a difficult relationship or staying with someone out of habit or fear of being alone. Trauma bonding is a specific psychological phenomenon, a deep, powerful, almost physiological attachment that forms in response to a repeated cycle of abuse or mistreatment, followed by relief, affection, or reconciliation. It is an attachment that forms not despite the pain, but in many ways because of it. And understanding that, really understanding why the pain itself becomes part of what binds you, is the key to everything else we are going to talk about today. The concept was first formally described by psychologist Patrick Carnes in 1997, who used the term to describe the strong emotional bonds that form between victims and abusers as a result of intermittent cycles of abuse and positive reinforcement. But the psychological roots of it go much deeper than that. The groundwork for understanding why humans bond so powerfully under conditions of fear and unpredictability was laid much earlier, in research that spans everything from attachment theory to the neuroscience of stress and reward. And what that research tells us, when you put it all together, is something that is both deeply uncomfortable and incredibly important. The human brain, under certain conditions, forms its strongest attachments not in safety, but in the alternation between danger and relief. Let me explain that, because I think it is the single most important thing to understand about trauma bonding, and it is also the thing that makes people feel least ashamed of themselves once they really get it. Think about intermittent reinforcement. This is a concept from behavioral psychology that describes what happens when reward, warmth, affection, approval, love is given inconsistently. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't, and the timing is unpredictable. You can't figure out what you need to do to reliably receive it. Now you might think that this would make the reward less powerful over time, that the inconsistency would cause you to give up and stop trying. But the research shows the opposite. Intermittent reinforcement creates the strongest possible drive to keep seeking the reward. It is, in fact, the most psychologically compelling reward schedule that exists. Slot machines work on this principle. So does social media. And so does the cycle at the heart of a traumatically bonding relationship. When someone is sometimes warm, loving, generous, and attentive, and sometimes cold, critical, dismissive, or cruel, your nervous system does not learn to stop wanting the warmth. It learns to work harder for it. It becomes hypervigilant to any signal that warmth might be coming. It floods with relief and gratitude and love when it does come. And the contrast, the exquisite relief of warmth after the pain of coldness, makes the good moments feel more intense, more precious, more real than they would in a relationship that was consistently loving. The brain reads the intensity of that relief as evidence of depth, of a connection unlike any other, of a love that is extraordinary precisely because it is so hard won. And that reading, that misattribution of intensity for profundity, is one of the central mechanisms of trauma bonding. I want to pause here and really let that land, because this is the part that most people have never been told, and it is the part that can genuinely begin to dissolve some of the shame. The relationship does not feel so powerful because it is so right. It feels so powerful because your nervous system has been conditioned by a specific cycle of pain and relief. The intensity is not evidence of depth, it is evidence of conditioning. And once you understand that, really understand it, not just intellectually, but in your bones, the grip of the bond begins, just slightly, to loosen. There is also the neuroscience of stress and bonding to consider, because I think it really helps to understand what is happening in the body, not just the mind, when you are in one of these relationships. When we are frightened or in emotional pain or uncertain, our bodies release stress hormones. Cortisol and adrenaline flood our systems, keeping us alert, activated, scanning for threat. And when the threat passes, when the person who was cold becomes warm again, when the argument ends and they hold you, when after days of distance they suddenly send the message that makes everything feel okay again, the relief is not just emotional, it is physiological. The stress hormones drop. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, floods in. Dopamine surges in the reward circuitry. And all of that neurochemistry becomes associated in the brain's learning systems with that person, with their presence, with being close to them. So the very person who caused the pain becomes the source of the relief from the pain. And that creates a bond that is almost indistinguishable from the inside, from love. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think it is one of the most important things I will say today. The person who is hurting you becomes, in your nervous system, the solution to the pain they are causing. You need them in order to feel okay, not because you are weak or foolish or lacking in self-respect, but because your brain has been conditioned through repeated cycles of pain and relief to associate that specific person with safety and comfort. It is a form of conditioning. It happens gradually, without your awareness or consent, and it is extraordinarily difficult to undo simply by deciding to. This is why telling someone in a trauma bond to just leave is not only unhelpful, it is a profound misunderstanding of what they are actually experiencing. Leaving is not just an act of willpower. It is not a simple decision that a rational person would obviously make, because the bond is not rational. It is neurological. It is physiological. It is written into the body's stress response systems and reward circuitry in a way that means leaving the relationship can feel, at the level of the nervous system, like a threat to survival. Literally. The body reacts to the prospect of leaving as if something essential is being taken away. as if you are in danger. And so staying, even though staying is what is causing the harm, feels paradoxically like the safer choice. Now I want to talk about how trauma bonding develops, because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in stages. And understanding those stages can help you see, with much more clarity and much less self-blame, how you got to where you are. It almost always begins with what is sometimes called the idealization phase, or, a term you may have come across, love bombing. The relationship starts with an intensity that feels extraordinary. The person is attentive in a way that feels unlike anything you have experienced before. They pursue you ardently. They make you feel special, chosen, seen. They may tell you very early that you are different from everyone else they have known, that what they feel for you is unlike anything they have felt before. There is a great deal of contact, messages, calls, time together, plans for the future, a sense of momentum and destiny. It feels like falling in love very quickly, and it feels wonderful. But underneath the wonder, something else is happening. You are becoming deeply attached, very rapidly, to a person and a version of the relationship that is not sustainable. You are being given a glimpse of what it feels like to be the center of someone's world. And once you have felt that, the loss of it becomes devastating. Because it does not last. At some point, and it is different in different relationships, but it always comes, the dynamic shifts. The warmth becomes inconsistent. There are moments of coldness, of criticism, of dismissiveness or anger. Maybe the first time it happens you are shocked and confused. Maybe you try to understand what went wrong. Maybe you apologize, even if you are not sure what you are apologizing for. And then, perhaps quickly, perhaps after some time, there is reconciliation. Warmth returns. They are sorry. They love you. Everything is okay again. And because you have been conditioned by the initial intensity of the relationship to associate this person with extraordinary love, the return of warmth feels like coming home. The relief is overwhelming, and your attachment deepens, and so the cycle establishes itself. Tension builds. Something happens. A criticism, an argument, a withdrawal, a period of coldness. There is pain and confusion and the desperate wish to make things okay again. And then reconciliation comes, and with it an intensity of relief and warmth that reinforces the bond yet again. Each cycle does not weaken the attachment. Each cycle strengthens it, which is one of the reasons why people who have been in these relationships for years often feel more attached, not less, than people who have been in them for months. The bond deepens with each cycle, even as the harm accumulates. There is another layer to this that I want to talk about, because I think it is important and rarely discussed. Trauma bonding does not form in a vacuum. It forms most readily in people whose earlier experiences have already shaped them to find this pattern familiar. I am not saying this to place blame or to suggest that people who experience trauma bonding brought it on themselves. Quite the opposite. I am saying it because I think it is compassionate and important to understand that if you grew up in an environment where love was inconsistent, where a parent or caregiver was sometimes warm and sometimes frightening, sometimes present and sometimes absent, sometimes loving and sometimes critical, your nervous system learned to interpret that pattern as what love feels like. Not because anything is wrong with your nervous system, because your nervous system is extraordinarily good at learning the patterns of the environment it grows up in and orienting itself around them. When you then encounter, as an adult, a relationship that replicates that pattern, that moves between warmth and coldness, between closeness and distance, between love and pain, it does not feel unfamiliar. It feels like home. Not a healthy home, perhaps, but a familiar one. And familiarity is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. We are drawn toward what we know, and when what we know is a certain quality of love, intense, unpredictable, requiring a great deal of effort to secure, we can unconsciously seek that out, over and over again, because on some deep level, it is the shape of love that our nervous system recognizes. I think this is one of the most important things to understand, because it transforms the question of why you can't leave from a question about your weakness into a question about your history. It is not that you lack strength or intelligence or self-respect. It is that you are caught in a loop that began long before this relationship, that your nervous system was already primed for this particular kind of bond. And that understanding does not mean you are destined to repeat the pattern forever, but it does mean that healing requires going deeper than simply deciding to leave. It requires understanding, at a real level, what you are actually attached to and why. I also want to talk about the role of shame in keeping people trapped in trauma bonds, because I think it is enormous, and it doesn't get talked about enough. When you are in a relationship that is hurting you, and you know it is hurting you, and the people around you know it is hurting you, and still you can't leave, shame becomes a constant companion. You feel ashamed that you are still there, ashamed that you went back, ashamed that you love someone who treats you this way, ashamed that you can't just be stronger, and shame, in a cruel irony, makes it harder to leave rather than easier, because shame makes us hide. It makes us pull away from the people who might support us. It makes us tell ourselves that we don't deserve better, or that we are too broken to find something healthier, and so we stay, not just because of the bond itself, but because the shame has stripped away the sense of self-worth that might otherwise propel us towards something different. Here is what I want to say directly to that shame. What you are experiencing is not a character flaw. It is a human response to a very specific set of psychological and neurological conditions. You are not weak for staying. You are not stupid for loving someone who hurts you. You are not broken beyond repair. You are someone whose attachment system has been activated in one of the most powerful ways it can be activated, and whose nervous system has learned to find safety in a place where safety does not actually exist. That is a wound, and wounds deserve compassion, not contempt. So what does leaving actually look like when you are in a trauma bond? Because I think this is where a lot of advice falls short. People say leave, get out, block them, move on. And while that is ultimately the direction that healing requires, the path there is rarely that clean or that quick, and pretending that it should be only adds more shame to an already overwhelming experience. The first thing I want to say is that understanding what is happening is itself a form of liberation. Not complete liberation, but it is the beginning of it. When you can look at the cycle you have been living in and name it. When you can say, I am not crazy, this is not love, this is a pattern that has been conditioning my nervous system in a very specific way. Something shifts. The fog starts to thin. The self-blame starts to loosen its grip, even slightly. And that small shift in perspective is where the possibility of something different begins. The second thing is that leaving a trauma bond is rarely a single event. For most people, it is a process. There are often multiple attempts, multiple returns, and each return is not a failure. It is part of the process of the nervous system gradually learning that the bond is not serving it. It can help enormously to have support during this process. A therapist who understands trauma and attachment. A trusted friend who won't judge the returns, but who will gently hold up a mirror. Someone who can help you stay connected to your own experience, to what the relationship is actually doing to you, rather than what it feels like in the intense, intoxicating moments when everything seems okay again. Because one of the defining features of a trauma bond is that the good moments feel so real, so precious, so filled with the promise of what the relationship could be, that they overwrite the memory of the bad ones. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is how the trauma-bonded nervous system protects itself. But it means that keeping a record can genuinely help. Writing down, in specific and honest detail, what happens during the difficult periods, what is said, how it makes you feel, what the pattern looks like over time, and then reading that record during the good periods, when you are most at risk of forgetting, can be a genuinely powerful tool, not to make you hate the person, but to help you stay connected to your own reality. The third thing, and this is perhaps the most important, is to begin to rebuild your relationship with yourself. Because one of the most consistent effects of a trauma bonding relationship is the gradual erosion of your sense of self. When your energy and attention and emotional resources are consumed by the cycle, by managing the other person's moods, by trying to secure their warmth, by recovering from the difficult periods and bracing for the next ones, there is very little left over for you, for your own friendships, your own interests, your own sense of who you are outside of this relationship. And so over time, the relationship becomes the center of your entire world, which makes leaving feel not just painful, but annihilating. Because who are you without this? What is left? I want to expand on this point about identity, because I think it is something people in trauma bonds rarely talk about, but almost universally experience. When you first entered this relationship, you had a life, friends, interests, opinions, a sense of your own personality and preferences. And gradually, so gradually you probably didn't notice it happening, those things contracted. Maybe you saw your friends less because it was easier, or because the relationship created friction around your other connections. Maybe you stopped doing the things you used to enjoy because your time and energy were consumed by the relationship. Maybe you found yourself doubting your own opinions more and more, second-guessing your own perceptions, adjusting who you were in order to manage the dynamic. And at some point you looked up and realized that your entire world had narrowed to this one relationship, to this one person, to the endless, exhausting work of trying to make things okay. That narrowing is not an accident. In relationships where trauma bonding occurs, isolation, whether deliberate or not, is almost always part of the picture. Because the smaller your world becomes, the more essential the bond feels. The fewer outside relationships and sources of support you have, the more you need this one relationship to meet every need. And the more you need it, the more impossible leaving feels. So one of the most powerful things you can do, whether you are still in the relationship or whether you have left, is to deliberately, consciously begin to widen your world again. To reach back out to the friendships that drifted, to re-engage with the interests that went quiet, to build, brick by brick, a life that is bigger than the bond. Not because a bigger life will make you stop loving them, but because a bigger life will remind you that you exist independently of them, that you are a whole person with value and substance outside of this relationship. And that is the foundation that everything else is built on. The answer is everything. Everything is left. But it requires time and deliberate attention to rediscover that, to slowly reinvest in the friendships that may have been neglected, to remember the things that used to bring you joy before this relationship took up all the space, to practice being alone without it feeling like a catastrophe, to begin, slowly and gently, to trust your own perceptions again, to take seriously the things you feel and notice, rather than constantly questioning whether you are overreacting or being too sensitive. That rebuilding of the self is not quick, but it is the most important thing. Because the stronger your relationship with yourself becomes, the less you need the bond to feel okay. And the less you need the bond, the more possible leaving and staying gone becomes. I also want to say something for those of you who have already left a trauma bonding relationship and are now in the aftermath. Because the aftermath has its own particular difficulty that is worth naming. You may find that even though you know the relationship was hurting you, even though you are out of it, you still miss them. Intensely. In a way that feels out of proportion to what the relationship actually was. You may find yourself wanting to go back, even knowing what going back would mean. You may find it very hard to feel okay, to settle, to trust, to let yourself be happy, because your nervous system has been in a state of chronic stress and hypervigilance for so long that stillness itself feels unfamiliar and even threatening. And there is something else that happens in the aftermath that nobody really warns you about, and I think it is important to name it. When you are in a trauma bonding relationship, the chaos and the intensity and the constant low-level vigilance, all of that becomes, in a strange way, normal. It becomes the baseline. And when you leave, the quiet can feel unbearable. Not because you miss the pain exactly, but because your nervous system has been calibrated to expect it, and without it there is a disorientation that can feel like emptiness. People sometimes describe it as feeling flat or purposeless, or like something essential is missing, and they interpret that as evidence that the relationship was real and meaningful, and that they made a mistake in leaving. But that feeling is not evidence of love. It is evidence of withdrawal. It is the nervous system coming down from a state of chronic activation. And it passes. It genuinely passes, though not immediately, and not without support. This is normal. It is the neurological withdrawal from the bond. Your brain's reward systems are accustomed to the cycle of pain and relief, and in its absence they are struggling to recalibrate. It takes time, and it takes patience with yourself, and it takes, often, the help of someone trained in trauma. Because what was done to your nervous system in that relationship is real, and the healing is real work. Not because you are damaged, but because you are human. And humans heal through relationship, through safety, through the slow accumulation of experiences that tell the nervous system that it is okay to relax. That not every relationship is a cycle. That warmth can be consistent. That you do not have to earn love by enduring pain. I want to close today with something I feel very strongly about. There is a version of this conversation that ends with a list of warning signs, a checklist of red flags, a practical guide to identifying toxic relationships before you get too deep in. And those things have their place. But I think the most important thing I can leave you with today is not information about the other person. It is about you. And the reason I want to focus on you is this. Most people who have been in a trauma bonding relationship spend a great deal of time and energy analyzing the other person, trying to understand why they are the way they are, looking for the explanation that will finally make it make sense, hoping that if they understand enough, they will find the key that unlocks the version of that person they fell in love with, the one who was warm and attentive and made them feel extraordinary. And I understand that impulse completely. But I want to gently suggest that the more important question, the one with the most power to genuinely change your life, is not why they are the way they are. It is why you stayed, not with blame, not with shame, but with real curiosity. Because the answer to that question is where your freedom lives. Why did you stay? Perhaps because the good moments were genuinely wonderful, and you were holding out for them to become the rule rather than the exception. Perhaps because you loved them, really loved them, And love does not simply switch off because someone is hurting you. Perhaps because leaving felt more frightening than staying. Perhaps because you had been told, explicitly or implicitly, that your needs were too much, and you had begun to believe it. Perhaps because somewhere, in a part of yourself you don't often visit, this felt like the love you grew up with, and walking away from it felt like walking away from something fundamental. All of those reasons are understandable. All of them are human, and all of them point towards something worth exploring, not to judge yourself, but to know yourself more fully than you did before. Because that self-knowledge, that honest, compassionate understanding of your own patterns and your own history and your own needs, is the most powerful thing you can build. More powerful than any list of red flags. More powerful than any promise to yourself that you will never let this happen again. Because the promises we make from a place of shame rarely hold. But the understanding we develop from a place of genuine curiosity and self-compassion that changes us at a level that lasts. You are drawn into a trauma bond, not because you are broken, but because you are human. Because you have a nervous system that was shaped by your history, and that history made you vulnerable to a particular kind of dynamic. And because you are capable of love, deep, committed, resilient love, and that capacity, which is one of the most beautiful things about you, was exploited by a dynamic that used the architecture of attachment against you. The work of healing from a trauma bond is, at its heart, the work of learning that you are enough. That love does not need to be earned through suffering. That consistency is not boring. It is the foundation of real safety. That a relationship which does not make you feel anxious and uncertain is not less passionate. It is simply healthier. That calm, steady love is not settling. That you deserve to be with someone whose warmth does not depend on your performance, whose love does not come with the threat of its withdrawal, who shows up on the ordinary days and the hard days, and the days when there is nothing particularly special to show up for, simply because they choose to. That kind of love exists. You are worthy of it. Not when you are fully healed, not when you have your whole story figured out. Right now, exactly as you are, with all the complexity and the history and the beautiful, stubborn capacity for love that got you into this in the first place. If today's video touched something in you, if it named something you have been carrying quietly, please share it. With a friend, with someone you think might be in this situation, anywhere it might find the person who needs it. And please give it a like, because it helps this channel reach more people who are out there right now, confused and ashamed, and convinced they are alone in this. They are not, and neither are you. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we are going to keep having exactly these kinds of conversations. Honest, warm, and grounded in real psychology. This is your guide to relationship psychology. I'm David. Take such good care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.